Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to our section maybe soon. Track 2. My name is Dr. Chigara. I'm a prof here with the Department of Interior Design. I'm so happy to have you all attend. And our section today is on social perspective in the classroom. And our first presenter, I would like to introduce him. He is Dr. Goody, and his topic is on teaching racism, on how to teach a moving target. Very interesting, topic. So I move that over to you, and you have 20 minutes to present, or you can also take time for Q&A after the presentation.
Thank you.
Over to you, Dr. Goody.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
All righty. My name is Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr., but you can call me Dr. G. I come to you from the great state of Texas. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's very interesting times right now. Okay, so let's get right to it. And one of the reasons why it's very interesting times is because as we speak, the state of Texas is, the legislature is currently debating bills that would take away or eradicate the concept of tenure. And for many of us who are part of academia, we understand that this is a hallowed part of our ability to speak truth to power without looking over our shoulders, the ability to speak openly and honestly about our research and pursue the questions with without any consternation or concern about any consequences. And so in addition to that, you all may have heard, but in the state of Florida, we also have a controversy over how to teach African-American history. Have any of you all heard of this? So the idea is that advanced placement is, first of all, another conversation whereby we have a tracked system, even though we have a public school system where everyone is, in theory, entitled to a free education. The idea is that some of us are more prepared than others. And part of that is through the advanced placement testing system that provides individuals with potential credit before they even enter into college. It is a mathematical fact that more white students are afforded the opportunities and are encouraged to take advanced placement courses, in addition to having the resources to study and prepare for these exams and benefit accordingly with respect to higher scores and placements in higher ranking schools. But the bottom line, though, is even with advanced placement, a nationally vetted system that many people have a stake in the state of Florida, advanced placement for African-American history, the course was rejected. And after 3 months of back and forth, the course was finally approved, but only with serious concessions with respect to taking out the word systemic. And it's very difficult to talk about racism in my country without talking about the institutional and systemic powers that have been at play. This is not about individuals who have been mean to one another. We're talking about my ancestors were forbidden by law from voting, from being able to move and purchase land and property, and from being educated by law. My ancestors were forbidden to read and write. So it's not a matter of individuals. We're talking about a system, which also brings me to my presentation right now. Because when we're talking about African-American history, what's fascinating is the ebb and flow. Many of you all were unfortunately apprised of a murder of the name of George Floyd, right, in May of 2020, absolutely horrific and shook not only our nation, but also many parts of the globe, including our neighbors here to the north. And so in the aftermath of that, in the immediate aftermath, there was a lot of reaction as far as, well, we need to do something. This is too big for us to ignore. But what's fascinating is despite that wave of outpouring and support, in the immediate aftermath, I don't know if any of you all are Star Wars fans, but the famous movie after the first one was The Empire Strikes Back, right? And so in terms of swinging the pendulum the other way, all of a sudden critical race theory became this buzzword out of nowhere. Right. And so now we're in a situation where we have this ongoing conflict about how do we remember the past? How do we even talk about history? What is the truth? right? And who has the ability to determine? So these are the ongoing the debates and issues and struggles that we're having currently. And so what I would like to do is share with you all my experiences in navigating this difficulty. So but before we get started with the warm-up, I do want to also introduce myself a little bit more properly, and I want to see if this tracking thing works, but it does. Okay, so I want to introduce myself more properly and state not only am I Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr., but I'm also a tenured Associate Professor of African American History and also the Dr. Ronald E. Moore Professor, Endowed Professor of Humanities. I've written several books in African American history, and as a result of that, in the aftermath of George Floyd, remember we talked about this, I was tapped by my provost to become chair of TCU's Race and Reconciliation Initiative. TCU, by the way, stands for Texas Christian University. We're a private university of approximately 11,000 students, graduate and undergraduate, located in Fort Worth, Texas, about 30 miles west of Dallas. If any of you all are American football fans, because I understand football means soccer, right, outside of our borders, but if any of you are American football fans, and that might not be likely now with the Maple Leafs, trying to advance right now. But that being said, our team was in the college football final this year. So if any of you all follow football, American football, but we were in the college football final. So just by way of background, the idea is that Texas football, these are the true religions that people follow. Okay, in my state, and so when you talk about this idea of African American history, oftentimes that's a bit ancillary or not as pertinent, right? Especially when you're talking about a private institution like mine, where, forgive me for the lack of conversion rate, but the tuition at my school is only, anyone want to guess in terms of American dollars, the tuition at my school? Try 60. And what if I told you 7 out of 10 families pay their own way? So this is going back to this other argument we're talking about as far as who has access and opportunity to education. So with that being said, in the aftermath of George Floyd, my school, along many others, said, okay, we have to do something. And so the idea was to create this Race and Reconciliation Initiative, which is designed to study our relationship with slavery, racism, and the Confederacy. And so what I did was I helmed it for 2 years, and I had to pass off the baton just so I could get back to my research. And I just want to share with you all what I learned in the course of those 2 years as far as how to go about navigating difficult political situations. Because if there's anything that I learned, ladies and gentlemen, is that I learned that history is powerful, but it is also political. So without any further ado, let's go ahead. Just by way of warm up, what I would like you all to do is engage in an exercise with me. I would like for you all to say the word silk, and that's S-I-L-K, silk, with me 10 times. I will count off with my hands, okay? And then I'll just ask a simple question. All right, so we're going to say silk 10 times, okay? And I'm going to count off, all right? Silk. What do cows drink? Oh, I got somebody. You're right. So who said water? Who's my, the extra coffee this morning? Very good. Very good. Very good. Very good. Okay. All right. Well, my daughter got me with this just the other day. Okay. I was going to see if it worked. Okay. But the idea is that the reason why I wanted to do this is because oftentimes when we think about history, we often get caught up in these patterns. And what I submit to you all is that, at least particularly with our system, is very linear, right? Very linear. It's like this happened first, this happened second, this happened first, this happened second. And then the question is, do we just measure change over time? Did anything happen different? This happened, this is 1800 and this is 1850. Was there any change over time, right? And that's pretty much our standard of measurement for history. What I submit to you all this morning is that based upon what I'm learning, I'm thinking that a different approach might be required. And what I'm suggesting is that history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it is cyclical, okay? It is cyclical, right? And so oftentimes what we will notice is that things will happen, at least with the African-American experience, so I'm going to share with you at least 3 examples. We will have events that will happen and times will change, right? Remember, times will change. We'll have new policies, we'll have new laws, right? We'll have new discussions and we get really excited about change. But the bottom line is what's constant is the thing called racism. And so we end up with something very, very similar, same game, but a different name. Okay, so that's what I would like to advocate for. Because oftentimes with many of my white brothers and sisters in my country, the idea is that, well, we made a change, we changed the law. Yeah, yes, you did. But at the same time, we still end up in a very similar situation where people like me are still disenfranchised. So we have to understand the larger cycle. Okay. So 3 examples that I like to get to very quickly. Again, based upon what I shared with you all, my experience of the Race and Reconciliation Initiative, I just wanted to give you all just an idea of when we were engaging with the concept of reconciliation, that we labored to get the message out that it was never too late to start the path of reconciliation, and therefore we whipped out all the stops, if you would, to make sure that many people can be involved in on the conversation. So we went out to the community. This is a Black-owned coffee shop, and so we would actually host meetings there, just inviting students just to talk about the concept of race, because so many people are afraid to even just have the conversation, right? We actually concluded our first year with a survey report whereby we went to our own archives. So again, not secondary materials, but primary sources, our own yearbooks, our board of trustee minutes, our own student, diaries and accounts that we're able to find to piece together our very own story about our own institution, right? And I think that was very helpful because it wasn't a matter of us making anything up or conjecture, but simply just using the information that we found, right? And again, I mean, we also made sure that we had, numerous individuals involved with, because during COVID, it was difficult. That's when I first started, but we would have many town halls, just this idea of creating spaces so that we can talk about it. What I did not want to do as chair was just go away for several months and all of a sudden release an email link, at the end of the school year saying, oh, here's what we found, right? So the idea was that all throughout the whole process, I wanted to be as transparent as possible and maintaining connection with our community. And that even resulted in the founding, based upon the suggestion of my graduate student, a podcast that you all can check out. It's called Reconcile This. I'm pleased to share that we're in over 13 countries now. And again, this is without advertisement, but it also shows that many people are hungry and interested in learning more about the conversation. And if you do check it out, what you'll hear is stories of good people just trying to do good work. At first, it started off insular. We're just looking at our universe and our campus, just trying to highlight that there are many people who are already doing the work. But then, how things grow organically, many people started contacting us from different universities saying, hey, here's what we're doing, and we would love to get in your podcast. And so it's been a beautiful thing to see it grow. And so one of the first things that I did was, because again, we're talking about linear, the old school linear thinking is, we have 150 years of history to cover, right? This is our 150th year. We were founded in 1873. And so when I started, it was basically 148 years. But my concern was, I don't want to set ourselves up for failure. And so I knew that with less than a full academic year, remember, we have like a month off for winter break. We have a week off we have fall break and spring break. And I'm talking about volunteer staff, right? I was the only individual who was compensated in terms of, time off, right? And a modest stipend, right? And the key word, ladies and gentlemen, is modest. Okay, right. So maybe I could treat you to Tim Hortons, but that's about it. Okay. But the point being that I just knew from the very beginning that in order for me to do a thorough job, it was an impossible job. Okay. And oftentimes for those of us who are doing the work, the universities will say, you know what, okay, it's a great idea, you figure it out, right? And it's like the office of one individual or maybe 2 who are under-resourced, and oftentimes the task that they have to tackle is just too large. So one of the first things I did was segment and break it down, based upon 3 areas that I thought most people have the most questions about. And that was the founding years, the transition to integration, because you have to realize that for nearly 2/3 of our existence, we were racially segregated, right? For 2/3 of our existence, racially segregated in terms of students, right? But Black people have always had their fingerprints and footprints involved, and that's something that we wanted to expose with our research. And then finally, I knew people would have questions about what was happening recently. Okay, and so those are the three windows that I wanted to focus on. And then based upon that being a foundation, I figured we could, if people were interested, fill in the gaps moving forward. And mind you, the last thing I'll say before moving forward to the first example is that when I first was given the charge, I was only given a 1-year commitment. Because of the momentum that we built, the university was essentially forced to sign on for a 5-year pilot plan. And so we're now in year 3, right? But remember, I was doing this based upon the mindset of I only had 1 year to work with, okay? And so this was the best that I could do with what I had, right? In order to set something up that would be sustainable. Okay, and apparently, I guess you could say it worked if the university at least signed on for 5 more years. So when we talk about the cyclical nature of history and how to deal with it, these are our founders. Okay, so here's our library, right? It's beautiful. Like I said, it's beautiful, right? And when I talk about resources, one fun fact is we have I think it's like a $900,000 gift annually just to take care of tulips on our campus, right? So it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So the tulips are beautiful and colorful, but the student body is not as colorful, right? It's just not, right? And so these are our founders, and as you can see, based upon the angle here, I guess what's the impression that you have of when you look at a picture like this? Small memorial. Small memorial. The fact that they're up on a plinth, what does that suggest to us? Elevated, held up in esteem. Very good. And so one of my first innovations was to install the sign here right by the statue, because in the aftermath of George Floyd, there was a narrative circulating on campus that that this was also a Confederate statute, right? What we found is technically that's not true. Confederate statutes are pretty explicit about having Confederate insignia or some sort of marking, making some sort of connection. And most Confederate statutes were erected in the early 20th century or immediately after the failed Reconstruction period, right? The lost cause narrative. This was erected in the 1990s as an homage to the actual founders. But what we did understand and learn through our research is that while it's not a Confederate statute, it is a statute of individuals with Confederate ties. You may not be able to see clearly, but there's 2 brothers, Addison and Randolph Clark. One brother actually did enlist with the Confederate Armed Forces and served, rose to the rank of lieutenant. His other brother joined him later on, right? And so the first thing that we wanted to do was just look at this whole idea of the founder story. What we discovered in our research is that even though there were no Black enrolled students, there were Black people still involved from the very inception. Charlie and Kate Thorpe are 2 names that the good news that will hopefully be a part of TCU history moving forward. And what we learned is that these 2 individuals were here lock and step with these 2 individuals from the very founding when they only had, say, a handful of students, right? And when I mean they were there at every lock and step, they did everything besides teach classes, right? From cutting the grass to nursing students to putting out fires to cooking. So in other words, this university in its formative founding moments, when in the very, you know how you have a newborn baby and it needs all this attention. The idea is that were it not for their contributions, this school would not be able to survive and get to the point to where it is. And this is also confirmed by his diary when Charlie passed away, when he talked so glowingly and lovingly about all, Addison Clark talks about all the contributions that were made by Charlie Thorpe. But yet, for 150 years nearly, nobody knew their names. Nobody knew their names. And so when we talk about the cyclical nature of time, this reminds me, and this provides us with an opportunity to intersect with present day, because I don't know if many of y'all are familiar, but the bottom line is that many faculty of color like myself undergo what's called invisible labor. And so what does invisible labor mean? Well, because remember, just like Charlie and Kate Thorpe were relatively invisible and no one knew about them, but they were still very instrumental. Well, invisible labor, what it means is that I oftentimes will have students who never have taken my class, are not registered in my class, but they hear that I'm a Black male professor, right? And they will seek me out and come to my office, and they will share with me their stories and ask me for advice. I have a box of Kleenex for them as they share with me their tears about their experiences navigating a predominantly white institution. And again, I do not receive any credit for this, nor do any of my colleagues. It does not show up when it's time for tenure and promotion, because what does the university want to know is how many publications do you have, okay? So again, that hidden labor from the past connects with the hidden labor of today. Second example would be, we have to be very careful about how we read our documents. I explained to you that we integrated roughly 2/3 into our history. So 1964, this is a screenshot from our website. We're very proud of it, right? On this day, from this day henceforth, right? That sounds pretty stately and serious, does it not? When was the last time you used henceforth in a sentence, right? From this day henceforth, right? Again, January 23rd, 1964. So this is the story that, or the narrative that we share with the public. And again, you can find this on our library, right? But what's so fascinating is this. Right, from this day, here's the original document. Here's the original document. Okay, here it is. But here's so fascinating. Very same document. Okay, very same document. Remember, I showed you this is the first page. Okay, very same document. I want to point out 3 things really briefly. Number 1, while we say, because remember what I talked about earlier, linear. If you're going to be taking a linear perspective, then yes, you can say that on the 23rd of January, 1964, comma, integration was enacted. End of story. We move on and we're happy-go-lucky. But see, that's only part of the story. And so just by merely reading the full document, we get a clearer picture of how complicated it is. Point number 1 is that they actually say, but we're going to raise our admission requirements. Our admission requirements and course requirements are being raised increasingly, and very few, and then if you think, oh, well, there's no connection, I'm going to finish reading the sentence. And very few Negro students could qualify for admission. Is that to say 5? Okay. Number 2, our tuition and fees will be raised from time to time, comma, oh, well, what does that have to do? Well, with access. And well, I'll finish reading. And relatively few Negro people would have the funds necessary. They're telling you in plain basic English. And point number 3 is they're saying that even still, a lot of Black people wouldn't want to go to the university anyway. So the point is this. They unlock the door, but the question is, did they open it? Right? And so I think what it does is it reminds us in our present day and time to what degree that we also have on paper, laws that change, but in actuality, systems and policies that are still replicating the same idea. So as I accelerate a little bit here, the idea is that, I don't know if you all recall, but the 13th Amendment is actually what ended enslavement in my country, not the Emancipation Proclamation. We can talk about that later, okay? But if you're really interested, you can check out the film on Netflix. I think hopefully they have it in the Canadian Netflix version. It's called 13th by Ava DuVernay, because what it says is in the 13th Amendment is that there will be no slavery except, comma, wherefore the party has been duly convicted of a crime. And so what happened was many individuals, that's when all of a sudden Blackness was criminalized. If you think that there's a random association of Blacks and criminality, it's not. There's called the Black Codes, and in many southern states, they literally just generated and fabricated laws like vagrancy, meaning that if you didn't have a job, you would go to jail. Well, of course I didn't have a job. I was just enslaved a couple of weeks ago. And so the idea is that they went off to jail, and then people who were jailed then would work off their sentence by being farmed off to local plantations that needed labor, right? It's called the convict lease system. The judge got a kickback, the plantation owner got free labor, and guess what? Black people got to be in jail doing the same thing by a different game. And I just wanted you all to look up UNICOR, if you have not heard about it. It's a federal program whereby incarcerated individuals still work for free, right? Still work for free. And as you all know, even the United States of America has the largest incarcerated population, roughly almost 2 million, of which Black people like me are roughly half the population. So you do the math. we're roughly 13% of the population, but roughly 50% of the imprisoned population, right? So you just do the math on that. And lastly, we all know that the 60s is a time of hippies and protest, right? And so what's so fascinating is that when it comes to the cyclical nature of history, so many times African Americans have been at the forefront of what we call protest culture, right? And when you look at the anti-war movement, even when you look at LGBTQIA plus movement, women's movement, many will tell you that they took inspiration and modeled many of the tactics and techniques utilized by African Americans who started the Black freedom movement way back in the 50s, before it became the civil rights movement in the 60s. And so what's fascinating is even still in recent times, African American students, as recent as 2016, made what I call not protests, because protest has this pejorative term of people who are anti, but what I call interventions. Because Black students intervened and publicly intervened at a football game, remember I told you about the importance of football, that is what brought the attention necessary and pressure to create in 2017 our very first ever Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We did not have one up until that point. And so, and again, these students had the temerity and the bravery and the courage during the national anthem to bring attention to their situation on campus. And so, if anything, they were simply doing what students have been doing ever since the 60s. These are white students at my school who were protesting because the library was not open on Sunday, right? And so when white students do it, it's okay, but when Black students do it, it takes on a different character, except when we're all celebrating football. So I say all this to say, as I conclude, that when we talk about race, it is very difficult, it is very sensitive, but it is very much possible if you're able to build the coalitions, bring people together, and show points of commonality based upon what it is that we're facing. Because again, history is not linear, it is cyclical in nature, and I think it's only a matter of time before we have another situation we need to negotiate, so we might as well tell the truth now while we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Putin. That was very intriguing. And I commend you for your bravery. So we take the next presenter if they are here. Anyone presenting in the session? No? Okay. Okay, then that takes us to Q&A session. Pardon me?
Could I have a comment?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for your interesting and important presentation. I'm from Finland, and I think that in general, in every country in the world, almost, I think at least racism is still quite strong. It can be, or the character of it can be in a way implicit.
Yes.
But the structural violence can be quite hard. So that life goes on, but something happens. In Finland, Finland has been named as the happiest country in the maybe in the Europe, maybe in the world for 6 times. But I have to say that we are not free from these kind of problems.
Yes.
I was the head of our faculty's equality group, and I learned a lot. Maybe in the near future, I think when the young people raises up and will take the power, maybe it will be better. But in Finland, we have still, how can I say, old attitudes there behind. Can you show me the maybe ugly? We had quite a nice, yes, nice discussion, and we discussed about the powerfulness of colors as symbols.
Yes.
And they, in the history, they have been quite opposites, polar oppositions. So that, for instance, black and white. One of our presenters said that it should not be used, because if we are looking at that picture, who is there very white and who is very black and so
Hmm.
on. So we all are round ones. I'm light one,
Oh, I see.
maybe a little bit darker than after summer and so on. So these minor oppositions are also making us or they are making our attitudes as stronger.
Well, and the thing is, to comment to your comment, this is one of the pieces that I really wanted to foster was let's just talk about it. Because you're right, so many people are afraid. And I think that is an idea that we need to really just confront and engage. My position is where else but the university is a more appropriate place for us to dialogue with one another, wrestle with different ideas, and at least try to pursue questions, right? And no one said that we all have to agree, but the idea that we're afraid to even have the conversation, well, that's what I reject. And if anything, what I wanted to do was simply, well, one of the things I had to do was reassure our alumni and also our board of trustees that I'm not a revolutionary. All I'm doing is what you all said you wanted to do with your mission statement, right? Remember, they have in their mission statement that we're supposed to pursue knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is what you said you wanted to do. And this idea that we're afraid of the truth, that no, my whole idea is that we should embrace the history and not erase it. And yes, there are some dark and embarrassing chapters. Speaking of chapters, in terms of something that's positive, here's my email. I have cards also if you all want to stay in contact, because I do now consult about reconciliation, and I'm very excited to share with people what I learned. As you all can see, I'm very excited to talk about this. But one of the pieces I wanted to share with you all is that this is not all doom and gloom. As a result of this research, we actually produced the first ever book solely dedicated to TCU's Black history, right? This is phenomenal. And if you notice, there are two other names here. This is the name of my postdoctoral student who was in charge of our oral history project, right? Because I wanted to capture the stories of African Americans alumni where they were still alive. I don't know if you all know, but in my country, it's very ironic. Most African American history is not written by African Americans, right? Remember, Black people like me didn't start getting PhDs with consistency until maybe like the late 70s, 80s, and even still, the year that I received my PhD in 2013, I think I was like one of 3%, right? To receive a PhD. So even still, people like me are in short supply, but the idea is that you can imagine most African-American history for the longest time has not been written by us. Our voice is missing from our very own history. So we wanted to correct that. And so she's actually from the Congo. And so, so she's part of the Black American experience. And also this is my graduate student, the individual who had the great idea about the podcast. And so I elevated them to co-authors. Right? Can you imagine before you graduate from, you complete your graduate program, you actually have a book publication, and it's beautiful. It's roughly 200 pages, and it chronicles the story of Charlie and Kate Thorpe, the idea that there was Black presence all the way up to the present time. And the idea is that this is nothing that we should be afraid of. Now that we know this history, now that we have the information, we're actually in a better position to move forward and become the institution that we want to become. But to the gentleman's comment, many people are very, very afraid to even have the conversation in the first place, right? And so my idea is let's just create more spaces where we can at least talk about it and figure out what it is that we agree upon. And I figured it might be easy to agree upon facts, right? When it comes to primary source documents, the document speaks for itself. Of course, we can debate as to how to interpret it, but at the same time, this document on this date says it has these words on it, right? So that can be hopefully a common denominator, a baseline by which we can build a conversation and figure out where to go from there. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation, by the way. I have a very utopian question, let's say. So for example, where we come from, university is free, right? So it's not really a matter of race, culture, or where you basis on those perimeters whether or not you get into a university. Right?
Okay.
It's pretty merit based.
Okay.
Do you think many of the issues that have been brought up today could be abolished if university in the US was free? Or maybe the tuitions were lower by law?
Well, ideally, yes, right? Ideally, yes. But see, this is what goes back to where's the okay. Because even right now, I think that many people would make the argument that what are you talking about? There's no barriers. There are no barriers. So long as you have a high enough test score, right, you can come into our school, right? But then the question is, but how do you end up getting that test score, right? There are a number of events that need to take place. And so when you talk about the feeder schools, it's not uncommon in my classroom for me to have students who just the year before in high school, their parents were paying $25,000 to $35,000 in American US dollars for them to go to high school, right? And just think about how that completely changes the playing field. If your parents are already paying $30,000 a year for you to before you even enter college, then that means a different type of quality education. And so in theory, yes, merit is something that many people are looking at. And in fact, as a counter to that, during COVID, some schools tried experimenting with the idea of doing away with our standard admission test or SAT test, right? I don't know if you all have a standard admission test here or not, but the idea is that you have to get a certain score, and typically the higher you get, the more scholarship money, et cetera, you get. But the idea is that they did away with that as a way to say, well, let's just try to equalize the playing field. I think it's just too early to tell. I mean, it was only a year or two ago, and just as soon as they opened up that door, because mind you, cynically, you can say that they made that adjustment because there was a lot of consternation and angst over what's the value of an education. Why am I paying thousands of dollars in tuition only to log into a Zoom screen, right? During that COVID period, right? Now that we're back on campus and now that everything has resumed, they've kind of dropped that whole SAT. They've dropped that line of argument saying that we don't need the SAT, and then now they've gone back to saying, yes, now we need your SAT now, right? So again, cyclical. This idea of it kind of goes back and forth based upon what the university finds advantageous. But again, it is. I think what makes it difficult is just to conclude. It sounds like a simple solution. Let's just focus on the merit. But when you think about what's behind a test score, how there are so many systemic challenges in place by which your average African-American student can get a good score, by which your average white student can get a good score. Those are the larger, more difficult conversations. And I think when people say that they're afraid, also sometimes I think people are just overwhelmed. Like, how do you even begin to have that conversation? Like at what point do you start? There's so many factors, at least in my country, that are indeed race related, right? From again, housing to employment to schooling, there's health indicators. All of these have been woven together. And so it's very difficult to say this one idea of test scores only, that should be the ticket. We're going to need a number of solutions working together. And that's why I think the more that we talk to one another, the more that we can be creative in figuring out more solutions to the problem of racism, which still, unfortunately, is stubborn and persistent. Yes.
Well, I think $60,000 a year, very few students are going to be able to afford that. And in any case, any group, for example, here I believe maybe 10,000 is the average. So the system in the U.S. and I have students that have come to Canada specifically because it's the fees are so incredibly expensive in education. So. But I was wondering, because you've been focusing on history, and I love history, and I try to study as much as possible. That's not my thing. I teach animation. But if we talk about history, then can we not identify some case studies, some history that speaks to the solution? Can we not identify maybe groups or cultures or countries or periods or something that says, there was a lot of issues here. There was a lot of there was a lot of problems in this particular culture. They solved it this way, and it stayed, it's stuck, it's there. So can we not look at that? It almost seems like we're kind of trying to evolve into something that's never happened before, where in reality, I believe, we've all experienced racism to some extent. I'm an immigrant myself, and I think I can't speak to obviously even close to what obviously, has happened in other groups. But I'm saying is that we've all kind of tentatively experienced it, even in Canada, multicultural as it is. Everybody here is an immigrant.
Mm.
We have a multicultural kind of mindset, which is awesome. I think it helps us in Canada, whereas I'm not sure we really have that much. I think it's probably maybe coming up to becoming a reality even in the US with all the influx of. But going back to the original point, can you identify anything in history? Can we talk about maybe some solutions that are already there for us to grab?
So what immediately comes to mind is that, I think about, for many of my Native American brothers and sisters, what happened with land grabs, in our early American history, and attempts to reconcile that. Some, again, on paper, courts were created, commissions were created to redistribute lands. But see, when you talk about the cyclical nature of time, if you haven't rooted out the racist mindset, then unfortunately, despite like the innovative measures that have been created, and again, call me cynical, but based upon my lived experience, right? I say that racism in my country is like water. It takes on the shape of its container. So the idea is that we build this brand new container, and guess what? The water still fills up that shape. So you're right. We have come up with very innovative procedures. Even, for example, in the case of our Japanese American brothers and sisters, during World War II, many Japanese American citizens were wrongfully displaced from mostly the West Coast and put in internment camps. And our president, later Reagan, apologized, and small amounts were distributed. I thought that was a good model, but I don't know if we necessarily built on that and duplicated that. And because mind you, it was racist because we were at war also with Italy and Germany, but we didn't remove German and Italian citizens on the East Coast, to different parts of the country.
We did in Canada though.
And we're in Canada. Okay.
There were Italians that were in internment camps in Canada. That's my background. That's why I know a little bit about that.
Okay, very good.
Just as a footnote, I'm actually doing a short film on the Japanese internment camps.
Oh,
That I will, I'll get.
okay, please. Let's connect.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say, because I think the other presenters here, is that also when you look at Germany in terms of the cycles they've gone through as far as not denying the Holocaust, putting money where their mouth is, like say the Berlin Monument, and still the argument being open about the more that they could do. The U.S. always points to that, and but I think what's kind of interesting is that they point to that as these are good examples, but that's something that didn't happen in our country. It's easier to point outside and say, shame on you, you should do better. But in terms of within our own country, there's still a lot of people in pain. And I think that, for example, as I opened up my talk, we're still having debates and arguments over how to remember the truth, right? Whether you want to call it critical race theory or whether you want to call it just asking critical questions, because mind you, if you pick up a typical American textbook, it's going to be whitewashed, ladies and gentlemen. You're not going to read about how Thomas Jefferson fathered, you all know the number, right? 6, not 4, not 5, but 6 children from an enslaved African woman, right? Her name is Sally Hemings. And she was, we believe, 14 years old at the time of her first pregnancy. So you all tell me, is that consent? But Thomas Jefferson, the rapist, doesn't sound so good. But it might be the truth. Thank you.
So much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Medin. I think we're gonna have Q&A plus after the second presenter. It's so nice to have you. So next, I would welcome my guest. He will be our second presenter. Sorry, you may not see that in our reply, but Mark will be presenting on the topic, complexity commonalities, training future development in education. Thank you, Mark.
Can I just say, I was meant to be here yesterday. I tried to come from Scotland. I couldn't get through your country. For reasons. So and hopefully my presentation will Here on this stick. It worked earlier on my.
Through your topic, a lot has been happening right now.
Right on my
Yeah.
laptop.
Of the hires after that for the Block Excellence hire, so universities and colleges.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah,
So you say it's a direct response?
yeah.
Thank you.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, that's true.
okay.
So after that,
Yeah.
we had that, universities and colleges in Canada have that competition. And there was, schools were hiring blacks and other immigrants just to fill that gap, that's for students that have
I see.
nice evidence, so these are one of those.
I see.
That was hired.
Is it okay to ask Dr. Gooding a question?
Yeah, why is?
Yeah, so my name is Brad, I work in Japan, and one of my colleagues, she's from South Africa, and she teaches about various connected language shared. And a lot of Japanese students really can't identify with this, so one lesson she does is she comes into class, usually very friendly, but then she starts screaming at them to get in the corner, and move in there closer, and they're all freaking out. And then she asks them how they feel, and they're just like really terrible, blah, blah, blah. And she says, okay, good, I want you to remember this, because today we're gonna talk about apartheid. And then they sit down, so that anchors in them some feeling to connect
Oh,
and try to question what the hell's going on here. So my question for you is like, do you have any tips for, ways of helping people that normally don't identify with this to kind of feel it a little bit more?
The answer is yes. One of the things that I like to do is meet people where they're at. And so, one of the things that even though this was a history-based, academic-based, research project, in my classes, I don't actually teach, if you look at on paper, history courses. I'll teach courses like race in the movies, race in sports. And because the idea is that, students nowadays have different sensibilities, the attention spans are just minimized. And so the idea is that, people love sports. Okay, remember I'm in Texas, we love football. So the idea is that, so they see sports and they're thinking, I'm so busy with my business classes, this will be easy, let me just take this class, right? They see sports, boom. Then they get in here and I get them talking about, like the first day, like we'll play ultimate frisbee. And it was so awesome is like, again, first day, I'll just come in the classroom, I'll wait frisbee, I'm like, who wants to play a game? Yeah, we go outside, people are jumping and diving, rolling in the grass, right? It's amazing. And then we'll come in and we'll sit down. And I'm like, oh man, talk to me, the winners, how do y'all feel? Like, oh man, awesome. Okay, I'm like, and then I'm joking about like, you losers, how do y'all feel? Like, if only she had caught the, oh no, why are you blaming me? They start going back and forth, right? So then I'm like this, okay. 45 minutes ago, we didn't even know each other from a can of beans, right? I mean, we didn't even know each other. Sometimes these students, they don't even know each other, right? But instantly gained, we're coming together, we're talking, we're laughing. It's like, wait a minute. I didn't even tell you all what was at stake. I didn't even say winners are going to get free bubble gum or, a trip to McDonald's. I didn't say anything. So here you are, so competitive, and the losers feel so bad, and winners feel so good. That's with nothing at stake. What if education was at stake? What if housing was at stake? What if capital resources were at stake? Right? Can you imagine? And then this idea, think about how passionate you were and how much you were trying to win. Well, okay, let's talk about this game of life. And then what I'll do, so that's a really good way, this idea of, okay, well, wait a minute, right? Taking something that I'm interested in, I say this sport and competition, then that completely orients them to this idea of, okay, you know what? We're going to take something that you like, sports, but now we're going to look at it through this different lens. That some of us in the game of life might be disadvantaged. The game might be rigged. The referee is always looking the other way, right? So just using these analogies, and so then when we talk about like present day, LeBron James and what is he doing? The idea is that, well, there's a reason, a historical reason. I don't know if you all heard, but LeBron James recently, a couple years ago, when he had on that t-shirt, "I can't breathe" and warm-ups, it was like a national story, right? He's being too political. And so this one pundit, I don't know if you all heard her name is Laura Ingraham. She famously told him to shut up and dribble, right? So famous, so interesting is like, why is LeBron told to shut up and dribble? Now we're able to have this conversation, historical conversation about black people, quote unquote, not being in their place, right? And how ever since the failed Reconstruction period, this is the narrative that had began. So again, the cyclical nature. So meeting them where they're at in contemporary time, right? Of course, they heard about LeBron James. Of course, they heard about the I Can't Breathe teacher scandal. But what they did not know is how it was connected to this other larger historical narrative. And now we're able to make that connection. And not only did it happen in 1865, right, Upper Spiral, it also happened in 19, and also happened in 19, and also happened in 20. So now we're able to start to see that there's a little bit more here than what met the eye initially.
Thank you. Yeah. How do they feel when they look at a frisbee after that?
They're like, oh, it's a game. But it really is more than just a game. It really is. So I guess while we're waiting for the technology to work out, I'm just curious, for those of y'all here in Canada, is there an admission type? I'm embarrassed I didn't know that. But so yeah, can someone share how does that work? Yeah.
I'll tell you about the programs that we have at Sheridan as part of the arts though. They are quite specialized, and we have an intense test for the animation program, for example.
Okay.
It's all dry. We don't know, it's blind, it's a blind test, but we blind review so that perception just sort of act and that's rates and everywhere that we fired, and that's totally the registrar's website. And it's quite extensive. It's quite a bit of work in the arts anyway.
Okay.
I'm not too sure about the other.
But also, do you all find the same challenges in terms of people are
will follow you.
It's different over here.
We have some issues that we're experiencing in our school that are not entirely specifically on race, but more on uses. We had a lot of refugees with a completely different background than the Swedish children, right? Then we face some issues with culturally they are unable to understand it. And hence they more or less decide to be by themselves. So it's very something that you can see directly once the book are created that students don't mix at all. And that becomes more and more this.
Okay.
Yes, in the presentation.
What?
What?
We'll keep it to 20 minutes. Yeah.
Right.
I'll give you 5 minutes. I think it's best if you take time for Q&A. Yeah, so I just okay, I'll let you know when to start.
Recognize our national curricula. We're about we started this year the possible to teach a different history of New Zealand, which is from going there in the mid 1800s.
Okay.
So they were there for longer than that, but it's about trying to address the racism that exists in the system by focusing on the history at a time when the white people came. So a lot of change. We're in a high school. It's challenging all round, and the nature of it is about challenging.
Right.
So you just have to get up for it. But the question I had was, do you have hope, or what are the trends with artificial intelligence and algorithms for affecting the kind of knowledge that's available for us all?
How about I answer that after the good gentleman from Scotland presents, and then I'll definitely come back to that. So I've been to New Zealand a couple times, and definitely going to talk to you about that. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. G. Like I said, I anticipated the Q&A was I'm happy to organize that section. So we just have to shift the gears here, and I introduce the next. I already introduced you, Mike, right? So over to you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have never been called a good gentleman in my life, so. So my heartbeat is probably going at about 240 at the moment. My stick didn't work. I couldn't get here by flight and whatever. So let's just see if I can focus. I do appreciate being Scottish. If I speak too quickly, you will not understand me. So I will I've been told I've got 20 minutes. You might be here a bit longer than that. I have been interested in complexity thinking for about 15, 20 years now. And this is sort of the next of the most recent iteration of the work that we've been doing at the University of Edinburgh. And so many of the points that were made in the previous talk sort of resonate with some of the points I'm making. And one, I just want to say one thing, species is what you talked about. And in a way that the narrative will end up with species, really. So what I want to do is, I'll give you a view about complexity thinking. I will then talk about how that has led us to look at this idea of complexity commonalities, which is also a word that you used at some point during your presentation. And then briefly at the end, I'll talk about some of the work that we're doing in Scotland that relates to this, to the messiness of the complexity. So education, certainly in many parts of the world, and certainly in the academic arena, is moving beyond long dominant modernist ontology. And it's moving towards ways of thinking and work practicing that are more holistic, more integrated, more inclusive, and I think significantly more emergent in terms of a worldview. The word post is in virtually everything, but broadly, I like to talk about postmodernism in its widest sense. And I think there's lots of great stuff happening in that arena, but so much of it is happening in silos or pockets by itself. So we've gone to some extent from the days of modernism being a one-size-fits-all approach to the world to something that I think is potentially more and more divisive, even although there's lots of great stuff happening. So what I'm really looking to propose is an ontological shift towards something called complexity thinking that is the catalyst to integrate, to make things a bit more coherent, but also to acknowledge the whole notion of emergence as being the part of the gig. Now, viewing education as complex, everybody thinks it's complex. I don't have a problem with that. The problem we've got is there are multiple, massively multiple meanings that are attributed to complexity. And many of those meanings have meant, particularly in the modernist era, that we try to reduce complexity, that we don't embrace it, that what we do is we actually even try to ignore it, so that therefore we get evidence that in this one context, this works, and then that is translated to everybody. Sounds rather bizarre when I say it like that. So the work that we've been doing, we embrace the whole notion of complexity and try to draw on a mix, an eclectic mix. And each time I go to the next bit, it adds another layer, and my head sort of starts to explode. But really, it's about trying to seek to appeal to a wide audience to get that integration and not to polarize people. It's actually very easy to present and polarize and dichotomize things because it makes for a good argument. Actually, I don't think that's the right direction. It's about trying to bring people together. So I'm going to present 4 interrelated complexity commonalities as an overarching framework to try and capture to some extent the integrated potential of complex, diverse standpoints. And I'm going to talk about becoming, lived time, self-organization, and boundaries, and trying to look at those as an overarching framework that starts to give us some way to integrate this complex world that we live in. If we start with becoming, now I've not put a lot of this, I never really was into understand Deleuze's work from France, but one of Paul McMillan, whose name is on there, we started to work on this, and the first 2 concepts of becoming and lived time have been really, really important in starting to help frame the framework that we've got at the moment. So becoming signposts the departure from this modernist way of thinking about top-down or transcendental reductionist notions of being. So in the modernist world, people up the hierarchy decide in a sense, in a stable entity way, this is correct, this is not correct. So we create these little pockets, and I'll talk more about that later. And it's all about predictability, and it's all about similarity. In education, we can see this in many curricula around the world, where the curriculum is about fixed forms of knowledge that are transmitted in linear manner. And one of the great anomalies of the world that we live in now are these people, whoever they are, deciding on what is best practice. And we get that everywhere. So that's the being bit. And I think being is important, but I think it's become far too important. The becoming is more akin to a postmodern ontology, and straight into education. It's about looking at learning as long-term, as iterative, and non-linear. And that makes it scary for all of us. Now, a lot of the work that we're doing is around the notion of learning being lifelong and life-wide. Life-wide is really, really important. And whereas lifelong is obvious in a time sense, life-wide is about the stuff where we learn in the spaces across our lives. And we've ended up perhaps giving schools, I don't mean too much credit, but boxing the idea of learning that it only happens in schools. And I'll come back to that later. And knowledge then becomes viewed as something that's more holistic, more dynamic, and even open-ended. And these things all become scary. And I've worked as a teacher, and I've worked in universities for 30 years, and we are besotted by learning outcomes. That everybody ends up doing the same bleeding thing. However, so what happens in this idea of becoming is that we acknowledge difference within and between individuals. So whereas being is about similarity and sameness, we want everyone else to be the same. This idea of becoming as a long-term iterative process is actually about difference. Difference within individuals, but also difference across individuals, and acknowledging that and embracing that. And we can be good at that, but the point you were making earlier is we're not actually that great at it. But differentiation and adaptability then become ultimately key factors in educational practices. Now, starting with becoming, I think, is helpful. Lived time is something that I become fascinated in, that I didn't really realize before, because it differs from the taken for granted notion of linear time. So again, we go back to the previous presentation, that linearity is basically a modernist concept where it's quantitative and it's aligned with predictability and certainty, and we just keep going on and on and on and on. So in education, linear time, I am slagging off, as Scotty's term, a lot of the modernist type stuff. We can't, linear time is always going to be there, but lived time is the bit that we have to get our head around. So the issue is then that linear time gives us timetables, it helps us, because we need some structure. But the problem is that we then say the curriculum is all a fixed product that is delivered in time-constrained units to young people in the same way, and the whole thing doesn't quite work. So lived time, complex, multifaceted, recursive, qualitative, and non-linear. So again, similar words to what I've used earlier, and this is the bit I hope you get your head around this, in which the past, the present, and the future are an integrated unity. It's way back to our Norwegian guys' work best in 120 odd years ago. So the past, the present, and the future have very distinct roles, with the present being the time when the past and the future merge. Now, those of you that are quite interested in what I'm saying will either like the next slide or you'll just give up, okay? So as our lived time experiences unfold, present time always interweaves with the past as our holistic mix of life histories mixed with the current context. Again, go back to the previous presentation, more or less exactly what you were talking about. Everybody sitting here, you have different life histories. We are all in the same context now, but everybody is thinking about what I'm talking about, what you were talking about differently. Because our lives are different, we all come from different places. It's not rocket science, but linear time sort of ignores that. Present time, though, is not a fixed entity. It's constantly being recreated as we transition from the current present to the next present. And sometimes that next present doesn't make a big short difference, but sometimes it's massively important. Future time then recursively merges with the current present to create each new present. But we don't know what's going to happen. You didn't know you were going to see a mad Scotsman walking about, ranting, and it may affect you in one way or the other. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We have an idea. I was walking in, sweating this morning, going, I don't know what's going to happen today. I didn't think I was going to be standing there at 10 to 10, panicking that I wasn't going to be able to present at all. Anyway, so, future time recursive and creates each new present. So that's it. I've not done this before. I'm talking to those not this. Uncertainty lies at the heart of the non-linearity of becoming. So live time is directly linked to this lifelong process of becoming, but it's about uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. So the becoming in live time, and that process of becoming in live time is influenced by a mass of different factors in the individual, in other humans, in non-human factors, and also, and what people don't like is luck as well. It's just, shit. Something happens, it's not good. Again, post-humanism at the moment is a big area that's starting to build a part of this move towards complexity. So, just very, very briefly, just to get this, so past into present, future comes, reversibly comes back, past becomes part of it, and it just goes on and on and on. And how on earth, when that happens, can we think it's linear? It doesn't mean there's not linear time, but in a human sense, this strikes me as being dead obvious. But there's huge implications for education. What I then want to go on to is talk about self-organization. Now, I've been really interested. This was the one that really got me into complexity, because it's so different from modernism. But the human ability to self-organize is very much, for me, the key feature of this becoming in live time process that unfolds over time. And system thinking is helpful here, because the nature of the interactions between the parts of a system, within a system and beyond the system, lie at the very heart, I would suggest, at the social realities that we envisage for ourselves. And I want to talk first about the one that's had a formidable and still has a formidable impact on education, which is the mechanical, or in the complexity of language, the complicated system. Now, this one, interactions are pre-programmed, so the systems function in linear, closed-looped manner to generate outcomes that are known, that are certain. Clock being a good example. Traffic lights in days gone by being a good example of that. Humans, in theory, maybe not the good theory, but in that theory, fit into that. And therefore, throughout the 20th century, throughout the neoliberal world that we live in now, pre-prepared curriculum context based on fixed knowledge transmitted in a linear manner to passive learners, passive receivers. The mechanical system. Teachers become technicians then, not professionals. They can't speak because their job is to deliver what I call stuff. And that stuff can come from anybody. If we move on to the complex system, which I think humans are, some parts of the system are able to self-organize and generate rich interactions, the term I really like, and therefore create, yes, predictable outcomes, but also, and this is the bit that changes it, unpredictable outcomes. And we all work with people who are predictable, but we all work with people who are, right at that other end, that you just don't know what they're going to do. So these richer interactions come about when the parts interact with each other, the parts of the system with each other, but also with people out with the person, out with the clock, with other humans and with other other non-human elements. So there's no pre-programming. And therefore, we as human beings, complex systems can be adaptable, they can be creative, they can react and influence events in ways that are potentially transformative. They have that capacity. I'm not standing here, but we all can do that. And your examples are clear examples how that journey is a very, very slow journey in many, many different situations. But humans have the potential to self-organize and have the potential to influence what's happening in the future. And I drink with a guy from the business school at Edinburgh who is right into artificial intelligence, and he's going, I keep going, but will artificial intelligence be able to do that? And he goes, I don't think so. But he's really upset about it. You know, he thinks it's going to take over. But self-organization does not exist in a vacuum. It's always, so as part of that becoming and lifetime process, we can self-organize, but there's also boundaries that are there the whole time. There's a myriad of factors that we have to negotiate. So boundaries. So I would argue that the key for us as educators, the challenge is to identify, accommodate, and influence that mix of factors in the future to be able to make more sense of this complex world. Boundaries then offer a framing device to support the integrated potential of self-organization as it unfolds in becoming. I'm going to run through boundaries quickly as the last one. And I think boundaries are probably, from an applied perspective, probably the key. I think a lot of what I've said is ontologically a bit different, but I think boundaries, how we negotiate, how we influence boundaries is maybe the key for the future. Boundaries are everywhere. Boundaries traditionally are fixed and they're divisive. They're rigid lines that holistically, the physical boundaries are dead obvious. But again, go back to what you were talking earlier, social boundaries are very, very divisive if they're quite fixed. Cognitive boundaries, particularly in the workplace, disciplines, in the school, subjects, in professions, they define what you are able to do and what you're not able to do. And all of these together, I think, come together to create emotional boundaries, fixed emotional boundaries that say, yeah, this is in, this is out, this is good, this is bad. Okay, thank you. 5 minutes. I'm doing okay. Because I know how far, you see, this is a bit, I know how much to come, and you don't. And some of you are going, please, please let me out of here. Anyway, so what happens is that these fixed boundaries create dualisms. I just noticed that. Predetermined learning outcomes seek to create high degrees of similarity, sameness maybe, between, yeah. So this idea that we're all a bit different, going back to that, but let's have curriculum that are tight boundaries that we're all going to be the same. And therefore, this idea of fixed boundaries sustains practices that are, as some people would say, from the art. Contemporary thinking, I think, is really helpful here. And Ackerman and Bakker, boundaries not only are barriers, and yes, they can be, and yes, they will be fixed, but they're also spaces. So again, going back to what you were saying earlier, spaces with potential for learning. Now, learning, remember, is not always good. Learning can be bad learning, if that's the right word, but it can be good. But we need the space. Fixed boundaries take away the space. And in the world, go and read everywhere in business and education, we need novel ways of thinking, because many issues are complex, open-ended, emergent, and wicked. So some boundaries are fixed, we need order, but many boundaries are flexible. They are even porous. And I think that's where we have to start to look. Malleable boundary lines help create the boundary spaces. So instead of things being really tight, yes, we still get some structure, but within those, we can create the spaces. Educators with flexible views can create boundary spaces to explore a range of learning opportunities with their students and with their. Now, of course, going back to my postmodern bit, if it becomes too wide, it doesn't work. It becomes chaotic. So the ability of the teacher to open and close boundaries at the appropriate time is unbelievably important as part of the future, as part of that complex world. Boundary spaces are the catalyst for individual and collective self-organising efforts to develop more integrated, adaptable, inclusive and emergent practices. Boundary spaces offer you a chance to explore the edge of your competence, learn something entirely new, revisit your little truths, and also to expand your horizon. So the long-term challenge, I don't think I've got this bit right, but educators need the adaptability, the openness, and the confidence to create boundary spaces to develop so that we can support people to develop the self-organising skills to make the most effective use of those spaces, the rich interactions that can take place within those spaces. Now, all education stakeholders, therefore, now this is, I can stop now, I've got one last wee bit, okay? Everybody then is involved in a self-organising process of becoming that takes place within live time and within boundaries. Commonalities function simultaneously in a coexistent, my favourite word of the moment, a coexistent and a co-implicated way, but often very, very messy. But what I'm going to do to finish is I want to talk, I've been working on this for 15 years, and I worked at the University of Edinburgh. My main subject area is physical education, and I've been fascinated in complexity. And I can talk about it for hours, the journey. I actually wrote a PhD about my 25 years from 1987 to 2011. Can complexity help us understand the journey that I was on? The answer was yes. So what's now happened is that we've got this 4-year program, undergraduate students who are going to be teachers, 400 students, lots and lots of staff. I'm not the program leader. Paul is, his name's there. Nicola is the deputy head of the institute. I work 1 day a week because I hate all the stuff that goes on. I just really hate it. And I got old enough and I thought, I'm going to keep doing this, but I'm not going to do that. I'll let the other people do that. So I'm not important, but probably am, because I sort of Svengali-like a little bit in the background. Program's been running for 100 years, so it's in a becoming process. And we'll get some people as part of that program who are locked into the way it was. And what's happened over the last 15 years is we've gone on this journey, recognising that the staff and recognising that the students are engaged in a self-organising process of becoming that takes place within their lived and also within the boundaries that they need. I know I've got to stop. Let me just throw this at you. Okay. We've taken the view that we develop the students' foundations. Because what's coming in the future, we don't know. They're on a becoming journey. They need solid foundations to engage with the complexity of what's coming later. We don't tell them what's right and wrong. So our foundations are about teacher professional development, curriculum, teaching, and collaborative. This is my last slide. Becoming a school physical education teacher, personal vision. So in the last 5 years, we've been doing lots of this. This is part of the self-organising process. What do you think education is? What do you think education is? What do you think education is? Going back to the being bit, I actually don't. I've been in physical education now for 49 years. I know a heck of a lot more about physical education than some of the numpties who make decisions in the government. I do. Why? Because I do. Because it's been my life. So, curriculum, holistic, I just say too, I know I've gone too long. Curriculum foundation, though, not just about the activities, but about the holistic and about the lifelong and the life-wide. And teaching foundations in the context of complexity about inclusion and adaptability. We use less to study a lot. throughout the 4 years of the programme. This whole idea, if we're going to go down this route here, we have courses on physical culture, on education, on health and well-being, opening up so that the collaborations can happen across and beyond the school. And last point is though, see down here, that's the big boundaries. Teachers have to negotiate those. They have to understand them and they have to negotiate them. They are there, some of them at the local level, some of them at the national level. Many of them percolating down from the national to, and I know you're all from different countries, it's going to be different in every single country. Said that before, I'm going to stop now. I didn't realise that we've written so much about this. So if you think about this, it's taken me 17 years to get to talk about the commonality. It all seemed to make sense. We didn't talk about the commonality when I was talking about what we're doing with students. It was about them. It was about teacher education. It was about. But we've written so much about complexity, about professional development, about vision, about curriculum foundations, teaching foundations. I didn't realise that until yesterday. I was on the plane. I thought, I wonder. I know I'm showing off that I've written a lot. I get that. But it's all the papers that you won't be reading. But the point is that I think the world of complexity, the world of complexity is there. It's not integrated yet. But every time I talk about this, it just makes so much blanking sense. So thank you very much for giving me a chance to talk to you.